Brilliant. Well, I think we're ready when you are.
I think we're ready, are we?
Yeah.
Laura, I forgot to say, if I get cut off, I've loaded the link to the Zoom in my phone, so I'll rejoin. I think Samantha can hear me, but that's all. I don't think I will get cut off. I never have yet. So.
Yeah,
okay,
should be fine.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, hello. Welcome, Katy Massey, to this Stay-at-Home Literary Festival, where we're going to be talking about your fantastic memoir, Are We Home Yet? How are you today?
I'm very well, Laura. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, I absolutely loved your memoir, so it's such a pleasure to be here today to talk to you about it. Before I and I also wanted to say congratulations on the Jhalak Prize shortlisting. That's so exciting.
It is. It really is. And so unexpected.
Oh, it's so richly deserved. It really is. And I'll be keeping everything crossed for you. Before we go on to talk about your memoir itself, I wanted to just ask you a little bit about your writing prior and your writing life in general. Mm-hmm. And you were mentored along the way by some incredible people, Bernardine Evaristo people, to name but one. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that and how it came about?
It came about because I tried to write creatively for years and years. I was a journalist, actually. I was a financial journalist. And I was freelance almost, I've been freelance about 25 years. So I was freelance almost immediately. Because there was a recession, and a bit like now.
I was going to say, hey.
Yeah, there'll be a lot more freelancers this year. So I thought that being freelance would somehow make it easier to write creatively, but I was wrong. It turned out that I was writing all the time for money and really struggling to understand what creative writing was, actually.
Yeah.
And I think I met Bernardine about 15 years ago. And I was in receipt of some funding from, I think it was New Writing North, who funded the programme of mentoring. And at the time, I'd come on a bit then. At the time, I was in the Northeast, in Newcastle, and I was doing an MA and then I did a PhD. And it was during that period that I met Bernardine. So, and then I wasn't really quite sure what the book was going to be. If it was going to be a novel, I think we would call it autofiction. Now, I wasn't in the position to invent new genre, so I wasn't certain what it was going to be, and that was partly why I ended up doing the PhD.
Yeah. I think that's quite common, isn't it, for a lot of us when we start out writing, we're not entirely sure which sort of path we're going to take. I mean, you mentioned New Writing North, and I'm sort of interested in that because, of course, your first published piece of creative writing, as you quite rightly said, you've been a journalist for a long time, 15 years plus, but your first published piece of creative writing was in an anthology called Common People, which was supported by New Writing North and other writing development agencies. And that was showcasing the work of working class writers. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about how you feel about that and why you think it's really important that more diverse voices in publishing are heard, working class voices, and of course, people of different heritage.
And I think it's important that everybody's heard. I think when we talk about literary cultures, we talk about quite a narrow range of people, actually. And to have a memoir published, especially, as just a normal person is quite rare. Even with the current boom in memoirs, it's still quite an unusual thing to do. Generally speaking, you're already an accomplished writer, or you're something famous, or you're a sports person. There's a lot of sporting autobiographies out there. So I think that really I want to be included, but I also want to support these things. And I want to say these are important things to do. Anthologies especially are important because they work as and Kit Duval did a marvellous job with this, publishing us alongside very prestigious writers. They work as a little, in acting, as you know, Laura, because I should say you used to be an actress. You have showcases, don't you?
Yeah, yeah.
And these sorts of collections work in that way, I think. And I know from Common People, we're all still in touch on Twitter. We have a Twitter group, and we all let each other know our good news. And nearly everybody that was published in that has had either an agent, a book deal. One person's doing a funded PhD. I didn't get funding. So, you know, great things have come from that book. But it's just everybody's story I would like to see out there. And I've done a lot of work around that myself with Arts Council funded projects around mixed race and around...
That's your Tangled Roots
exactly.
project, isn't it? Yeah,
exactly.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah.
I mean, do you want to tell people a little bit about that? And also maybe, you know,
yeah, I mean, that is 30 odd short pieces of memoir, all by people who are not, it's not by people that are all mixed race, it's by people who have experience of mixed race families. And it was really important to me that it was as inclusive as possible. And I did another collection, a much shorter collection called Who Are We Now, which was around people's lived experiences of Brexit, because for the same reason as I did Tangled Roots, I wasn't reading about these. I was reading top line policy, I was reading blowhards on Twitter, but I wasn't reading everyday people's experiences. And life as it's lived is very important to me. Having said that, I'm writing a novel now, but to go back.
We'll come on to that later.
Yeah, we'll get to that. But to bring dignity to everyday life, I think is very important. And everyday life is where we experience each other. We do brush up against each other all the time. This sort of lived metropolitanism. It's very important part of most people's experience. It can be positive, it can be negative, but it's there. And to assume that we all can be separated neatly into separate either genders, racial groups, sexualities, it doesn't work like that, I don't think.
Yeah. I was sort of interested in you sort of talking about everyday life and the fascination with, you know, everyday people, different attitudes and that, because I'm really interested in what pulled you, what drove you. I'm not sure which it is, whether it was a pull or you driving towards memoir, towards life writing, because of course you did your PhD in that as well, didn't you, as you touched on.
And this book was my creative thesis. So my PhD, I wrote this book alongside doing 30,000 words, I think it was, now, of literary criticism. But what I really wanted to know was why aren't I reading these stories? Why don't I read these stories? And that's what I set out to find out. And I mean, a big important part of this is that not everybody has access to their stories. And there's all kinds of things about my history that I simply don't know. And there's even more that I've had to take my mum's word for. And I can't prove it. So I think this notion that somehow if you haven't done the whole, you know, going through family trees, and a lot of people cannot excavate that. So I think the PhD was about making the process of recording a life as accessible as possible and breaking down some of those assumptions and some of those barriers.
Yeah, so it's a really fascinating subject, actually. And I think, you know, there's a lot of people out there, as you said, who would actually really struggle. I would really struggle to access my family tree, to be perfectly honest, for all sorts of reasons that, you know, I won't.
I mean, lots of people. Adoption is a big reason. Or simply parents who passed away and didn't set down the facts of their life. There's so many reasons. It's more unusual to be able to trace these things back, I think, than
definitely
people realise. Actually, I don't think that's an everyday thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also that thing that, you know, as you were saying, having to take your mum's word for certain things.
Oh, yeah.
That's true of others as well, isn't it? Is that if we can talk to somebody, we're only hearing it from their perspective. And in a way, that's where creative nonfiction is really interesting, isn't it? Because there's that sort of the hinterline between sort of fact and fiction, and you know, and what is fact. It's
well, I think I've tried to do that through having my mother's voice in the book.
Yeah.
So when she's telling me about her early life, that is her telling the reader,
yeah,
and to present it as it was presented to me. When people ask me about this, I always say that's fascinating. Stage that as a mystery within your memoir.
Because, I mean, I think you capture your mum's voice really well, actually.
Oh, thank you.
I sort of really felt that I had a very strong sort of handle on your mum. It might not be right, of course. But as I was reading it, you know, that's what I took away from it. I wanted to sort of you actually finished the book, and I'm going to ask you to read an excerpt after this question, Katy, but I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about the fact that you finished writing the book in 2010, but it was published in 2020 as part of Jacaranda's 20 in 20. Why did it take so long?
That's a good question, Laura. I mean, a lot happened personally. I met my partner, we had a family, a lot of things happened. But also, I think the world changed, which it's not a huge thing to say, really. It sounds very pretentious, but trends come and go in publishing, as you know. You've published many more books than I have. And we're all very aware that as we spend all that time sequestered in a room writing, around us, readers' expectations are changing. And I was fortunate in that Jacaranda put a call out for 20 completed manuscripts, which is quite a lot. Quite a lot from any section of the population, but especially to say 20 completed manuscripts, publishable standard from people of colour. So I got lucky in that I was included. My quite unusual story was included in this sort of cacophony of voices. And as the books have come out, they're all incredibly different. I mean, they're everything from memoir, another memoir, not mine. There's 3 memoirs, in fact, to a book of historical walks, to collections of poetry. I mean, they're very, very diverse. So I think I was fortunate in that my voice was part of this range of voices. I think I had a lot of interest in the manuscript over the years, but nobody was interested in it as it was. So the structure put people off, the inconclusive ending was considered problematic. The fact that I'm very open about something not being entirely true. I think this sort of cleared the pitch for me because it became quite an unusual. I didn't know it was unusual as I was writing it. I was dealing with problems as I encountered them.
Yeah.
The bit where my mum talks about the boat that she came over from Canada on, the Mauritania. And when I went to Google, I found that the Mauritania had been scrapped before she arrived in England.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah, we were actually on the QE2 and she pointed to it and said, oh, I came over on that boat. And I didn't know what to do with that. My mum sadly passed away on the day of lockdown, actually, last year. Okay. But I kind of, I'm mentioning that because I'm really pleased that I did it like this because I preserved her personality. I realised that if I could go to Google, I could prove when she was incorrect. I hesitate to say lie because I don't think she is lying. I think she believes entirely what she's saying. I could prove she was incorrect, but I couldn't prove my truth. So I realised very quickly that I was just robbing myself of the bit of history that I had and that I'd relied on my whole life. I was a middle-aged woman, I remember right at this time. So that is staged within the book for that reason. It's to preserve her and her attitude to the facts and sort of the way she liked a good tale over accuracy. But it's also to preserve my sense of my story because I could have spent. Well, I did spend a week on Google actually, but I just ended up breaking things down. I couldn't build anything else.
Yeah, it's also I think you're being quite modest actually. First of all, to say that you're really lucky. It must have been really hard for them to find 20 voices because actually it's fantastic.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
This feels like a really good time, actually, Katy, to ask you to read something for us from Are We Home Yet?
Yes, well, I'll read. I'll put my glasses on as well.
Okay.
So I can see, because that's always useful when reading.
It does help a little bit.
It does, I find that. And I'll read actually the first chapter, because this doesn't require very much setup, hopefully. I'll just say that it's a dream sequence, and it introduces, I used to dream about my family a lot, and it might be significant that when I finished this book, that it pretty much stopped. All this jumble of dreams, I think I've made some sort of order of it, and it pretty much stopped. But in this dream, everybody in our family and who are around our family that I write about is introduced, so it doesn't need me to explain any further. I recognise the matching polished pine G-plan dining table at which I sit. The deep orange shaggy rug is cosily familiar beneath my feet. This is 24 Victoria Park Avenue, the house where I grew up. The nearest thing I had to a home during the closest experience I had to a childhood. A couple of feet behind my chair, the orange rug gives away gradually to stony moss and miniature ferns. The roots of trees rear up around the table, a green guard for the brown and orange dining arrangement. In the background, I can hear birds' wings catch branches, causing dappled light streaming through the leaf canopy to dance on the G-plan table's mirror-like surface. A verdant discotheque. The light falls now on teacups of finest china and gold leaf, then on glittering plates which shine like huge gold coins and are piled high with French fancies and Battenberg cake. I am waiting at this table. I wait in a state of long-term expectation, where all tensions are balanced so perfectly that I appear to be calm. It is the epic wait of Miss Havisham at her wedding breakfast. I appear to have mastered acceptance, but instead I have achieved a state of constant, considered anticipation. In exact opposition to the way that one usually just knows in dreams, I do not know why I am waiting. I am not waiting for guests. They are already here. They surround me, and all the chairs that usually remain empty are, in this imaginary dream time, filled. My brother Paul is sat at the table, grinning so wide his face is split like a custard cream. I am angry with Paul. Will I ever stop being angry with Paul? But I am so happy to see him, I grin through the tension. I wonder if he is convinced by my dream smile. My daddy is there too, or rather Cyril, or father. No, I never had the chance to go out of calling him daddy, so I stick with it. It is the right decision because he is smiling back at me and calling me his khaki princess, like he did before. I am looking at him hard, but I can't make out his features. But I know it is him because I can see the outline of the hat he always wore, like someone just stepped off the boat. Mam is at the tea party as well, for a tea party it is, and everyone is tucking into the fine china tea and colourful cake except me. I'm the only one who is looking on, observing. I am the only one who is confused. Beneath the noise of raised voices, laughs and chinking cups, I am muttering that this can't be real, not even dream real. Mam glances at me with a look that belongs to the time when I was little. Her eyes say, "Are you okay?" And also, "You'll feel the back of my hand if you don't behave." But the look lasts only an instant, too quick for me to ask what she and the others are doing here. And anyway, how did she become so young? I know it is all wrong. Mam's tight-fitting dress that she hasn't worn since 1979, Daddy's out-of-focus features, Paul's brilliant laughter, and Andrew's garrulous eyes. It is not that some of these people are dead, nor that in life they were never all together, never mind in Joy's tea parties. It is not even that I am the only one who is aged. I should be about 10 years old, but I am almost 30 years older and appear to be the only one around this table who is not fixed in time, stuck at this party among the trees and the birds, where the tea and cake will never run out and conversation comes as easy as breathing. No, what is wrong is that I'm the only one waiting, suspended between what has been and what could be, suspended in the realm of the possible for as long as I manage not to breathe out. I'm sitting in the bosom of my fractured, half-dead family, holding my breath for dear life, and I'm waiting to go home. I know, I'm feeling a bit filled up as well.
Yes, well, that is just a wonderful introduction to the book. It carries on just as beautifully and so moving as well. It's great actually, because it's been a while since I've read your memoir. In fact, I had a quick flip through earlier on today. But you know, that's just so lovely, and the way that you capture that sort of sense in dreams, the way that we start to know that something's wrong, but we want to sort of hold on to it and savor that moment and enjoy it.
Time is different, isn't it? There's so much about time in the book and memory. And I had no trouble at all writing that. Once I'd remembered that dream, it just wrote itself. It wasn't a problem at all, but it's so difficult to capture them. It's so they drain away.
Yeah, they do. I mean, it's that thing, isn't it? You know, they say that you should keep a notebook by your bed if you want to capture your dreams, because life takes over and they disappear. But that's that's probably a sort of testament to the power of that particular dream, Katy. That it just sort of, you know, it came, and how much it sort of resonated.
I think my brother Paul passes away, as you know, in the book. But it's significant how much more I dreamt about him than anybody else, and how he was so much more present for not being present. And that's something that only can happen in that dream, imaginary space.
Absolutely. No, that's really fascinating, because my father died when I was really young, sort of 6 or 7. And I've never dreamt about him at all. But my sister, who's a bit younger than me, dreams about him all the time. So that's really interesting about, you know, what you were saying about Paul's presence in that particular dream. Anyway, we digress slightly. Let's get back to your book. You know, you mentioned your brother, and obviously, you know, your mum has got a huge part in the book. Can you tell us a little bit about the specific challenges of sharing such an intimate part of your life, of publishing such intimate?
It's a strange thing. No, I should explain why it's intimate. It's because my mum was in the sex industry, quite good at it, quite successful at it. Ran a brothel, but during my childhood, I could never really talk about what she did for a living. And it was the source of, you know, there weren't documentaries then about the sex industry. It was before Belle de Jour, before, you know, it was taboo. And I realised I wrote it partly to sort of rid myself of that sense of shame that the world had given me about it. Because the truth is, I was very proud of her, you know, and I was very proud of her for lots of reasons. And but I couldn't sort of be publicly proud of her. So for me, publishing it is, I don't think all my family agree, I've got to say, but for me, publishing it is a celebration of her, and it's a celebration of not being able to celebrate her at the time. So I've enjoyed publishing it, and I was scared that people would think less of me for it. And I realized as I was writing it that was the voice of the world, and I would never be able to write this if I listened too loudly to what the world was telling me. I had to listen to what the book told me was necessary. And those things are all central to it. The sex industry, a sense of shame. Even writing about race found very difficult. But having done it, I almost immediately became proud of myself. So I think that's how you know you've done the right thing in a strange way. I had to be in a bit like the unusual form of it. You know, they're going back and forth through time. They're using dreams. They're using semi-fictional information and building those scenes like a novel. All of these things were what was demanded by telling that story. And I think I would have written it quicker and published it quicker if I'd have taken a more traditional approach. But it didn't seem to do the story any favours to do that. And I did turn it into a novel at one stage.
Did you?
But I was not. Yes, I did. And I actually did pretty well with that. I got some interest with it, but I didn't like it. And I felt really insecure about letting it go forward as a novel. So, yeah, it's a strange thing. The book has really told me what to do, not the other way around. That's how I feel. Or I could be just displacing any responsibility, Laura, you choose. That's how I look at it. It's all the demands of my muse.
Yeah. No, that's really fascinating because I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And so I find it really interesting that sort of, in a way, that how it enabled you to let go of shame and to honour your mother and show the sort of pride. I think, particularly back then, it was so much more stigmatized and there was a lot more taboo around it. And again, there's something in my family background that was and childhood that was very not talked about because it was taboo at the time. I've never written about it, which is why I'm particularly fascinated.
It's hard
by what you've just said.
Yeah, it's hard to, because although the world changes, we're still the children we were, and it's difficult to overcome these things. And there's no sort of magic way of doing it. I saw a counsellor for 2 years. Right. Well, I think a poor woman, because I'd write and then weekly just go and dump it on her. I don't think she said more than 6 sentences together in the 2 years. But that was very helpful. And it was very helpful for the writing because I got to hear myself say the story and narrativized as I told her. So that was
I can imagine that actually it's like you're talking the story before you actually came down to write it, and going to help you sort of extrapolate and sort of
and this chat women and talking and the healing nature of that is something else I wanted to honour in the book as well. I think it's derided as gossip, so much of it.
It's so not gossip, is it?
No, it's half the time it's women healing themselves. It's women.
I think the origin wasn't gossip originally. It was like the wise woman of the village. It was a word that had really positive connotations.
Yeah.
It's only sort of centuries of misogyny that have turned it into this derogatory term.
Yeah. I mean, in literature and in filmmaking, texts that take women talking as their subjects are soap opera, aren't they? They're melodrama and soap opera. They're not respectably artistic. And in fact, the most artistic, particularly of films, have the least dialogue. That seems to be a sort of marker. You're watching something artistic, and it's staying. And I think there is it's just you're quite right. A patriarchal snobbery against women talking. It was Mary Beard, Women in Power, Women and Power, not Women in Power. A marvellous little treatise. It's an essay, but it's the most wonderful thing that she writes about her shock at getting trolled for being a professor of classics, which is only what she's been for 30 years or something. But she traces this notion, this horror of women, and particularly women who are no longer fertile, piping up, having an opinion. Traces it right through from the classical era. It's fascinating. But anyway, we digress again. I digress.
Yeah, but in a way, not because.
In a way, not.
I obviously one of the central, the central sort of bit of the book is it's about mother-daughter relationships, and particularly complex mother-daughter relationship for some of the reasons you've just touched on in terms of what the industry that your mum worked in, for one thing, the fact that your mum was white, you're not. Mother-daughter relationships, they're explored a lot in fiction, film, television, what have you. What is it, do you think, that fascinates, and where do you think the specific complexities of your relationship with your mum fit in there?
I don't know. I haven't come across any female person that's described the relationship with their mother as simple.
That's true.
you know, we have no issues. We just get on. That's never happened to me. It could be that I've got that book out there. So, but I think there are complexities. I think patriarchy has something in that, because we're supposed to be the less desirable gender to give birth to, and we're historically for centuries a sign of failure. And I don't think that helps you get off on a good foot as a daughter to a mother. If everybody around is going, oh, girl, I don't think that's ideal. But I think with us two, she was a very complex woman. I hope she comes over as quite difficult. I hope I haven't been too kind, because she was a very difficult woman, and a very not a person you could ever convince of anything. So if once you had an idea about something, that's that. Whereas I a person who sort of values evolving. I like learning about things. She was always impatient because I like to change things. I like novelty. I like working freelance because I got to do different things. When I went back to study, she couldn't understand it because it was expensive and essentially a waste of time.
Right. Okay.
So we differed on quite a few things. Yeah, she was a piece of work in some respects, definitely. But again, show me a daughter that wouldn't say the same. Particularly about a mother who's brought them up on their own. So there isn't the alternative parent to play a different role with. Yeah, it intensifies. And I think being a different race or being visually identified as a different race, I have to think about it because I live from the inside out. So when I looked at my mother, I never thought, oh, here's this old white lady. She was always just my mother. You know what I mean? So I think, it's just ma'am. So I think, but I do think, and I do allude to it in the book, I do think it means that I have a set of experiences that I can't share with her. But I suspect it might be the same if I was gay or I had a different non-normative characteristic that she didn't have. Because she wasn't that great at empathetically thinking herself into different people's shoes, in all fairness. And she was hypercritical. And there were things about her that weren't, the easiest to live with. Of course, I miss her like mad now. She was like a force of nature. It's lovely, actually.
She reminds me actually of, as you know, I grew up in the north myself, and she reminds me of, my grandmother, actually, my maternal grandmother, who was a Lancashire woman, but again, very strong-minded.
Yeah. I know.
Not easy to persuade,
change
your opinion, not very diplomatic. Many wonderful qualities, just like your mum too.
I think these are the qualities of survival, aren't they? I used to say about my mum, if you threw her down, she'd bounce up without bending, and that's kind of what I mean. And there is definite. Certainly, I've picked that up from her. This ability to sort of always see a future, no matter how bad the present is. I can always see beyond it. But
just an incredible sense of resilience. There's like this incredible sense of resilience, but from both of you, actually, from you too, and maybe that's something that's come from, in part, from your mum. I don't know.
I think that's true. I think I was 40 when I finished the book, and I had a sense of really getting a sense of closure on the nature of our relationship.
Yeah.
So I kind of really accepted it. But I then had my own daughter, who's now 8.
I know, I was thinking that.
And now I'm seeing it from a completely different point of view. Now I could write another book on the same subject that would be totally different. So it has to be, memoirs they're never the definitive version. They're always snatched from time. And I'm pleased that I made that illusion clear in the book, that this is the truth of it from my point of view at this particular point in time. That's all I can do, I think.
Yeah, that's all you can do, isn't it? It's just about your authentic truth. Can you tell us, 2020, 21, it's been a year unlike any other, and pretty challenging. Can you tell us a little bit about what your experience of publishing in a pandemic was like? And a debut at that, I have to say, a debut in a pandemic.
Yeah, debut. I think I've certainly missed out on parties that I imagine would have happened. I can't remember many parties that I've been to, in all fairness, but I feel like I've missed parties that I subsequently wouldn't remember. I think I lost my mum on the day of lockdown last year, so it was the 23rd of March, I think. And then 3 months after that, obviously they shut the schools. 3 months after that, our dog died. And a couple of months after that, my book was published. So it's been an incredibly bright star on a really dark horizon. It really has been marvellous. Hearing from people that I haven't seen since boarding school. My headmistress, Mrs. Black, wrote to me about it, who must be in her mid-90s now, emailing me away about what she thought of it. It's been this sense of honouring the past, but also the past reaching out to sort of hold me. Excuse me, during what has been such a difficult and appalling time on so many levels. It's been marvellous, actually.
I love that. Sorry.
Go on, Laura.
I was just going to say, I love that about the former head of your school reaching out to you. I was absolutely fascinated by your school in the memoir as a kid who went to a massive comprehensive. I used to dream about too much Enid Blyton probably, but I used to dream about boarding school. I really want to hear a little bit about your your schooling there, because I think that's also really interesting. But I'm looking at the time, and I know that it's really, we want to hear another reading, basically, Katy.
Well, and I guess I might have prepared one for you, Laura. Think of a question about boarding school while I read this. This isn't about boarding school.
Well, I was just intrigued about, what did that experience teach you? This sort of boarding school in this remote landscape on the Yorkshire moors. It sounded like something out of Bronte, but clearly it wasn't all that.
Just to answer that question, I think it did its job. I think my mother got value for money, in that I now never feel particularly out of place. So I felt so ludicrously out of place there, and I think that's clear from the book, that since then, whether I was interviewing, I don't know, the chief executive of NatWest, or doing the things and running around the city of London when I was in my early 20s, and going to champagne Charlie parties and doing all this stuff as a financial journalist, it never occurred to me that I didn't belong there. It never occurred to me that I shouldn't be there. So I think I partly put that down to my mother, and you'll be familiar with this phrase, sheer brass neck. Yeah. I learned that, I think. And it's always been a bit surprising to me when I felt a cold shoulder from a community, or from, and I talk about racism in the book, but it's kind of like, it's always a bit of a shock that I'm made to feel unwelcome.
Right.
Yeah. And that's partly an arrogance on my part, that I think, I should be welcome. I'm used to being liked, what can I say? So I'm
quite right too.
I find it really weird when people say, and I've heard this, she's a bit much, or she's opinionated, or all of the things they used to say about my mother, by the way. I don't think these are a coincidence. I'm amazed at that, and there's a bit of me, I'm 51, and there's a bit of me that still is, which is, I think that's boarding school fire. I think that's what it did. But it made me independent from my mother, so that what we went through as a family was less damaging, because I'd already become an independent person, I think. Yeah. So they're the two things. Anyway, brilliant. I'm going to read This is
Yeah,
not
if
about
you
what.
could read something, if we've time, I'll ask another question, and then maybe we'll see. I'm sure that people have questions of their own that they'd like to ask you. But first of all, let's hear some more from Are We Home Yet?
Okay. This is when I'm still quite a young child, and it's called The Day She Nearly Left. And my mum altogether was married 3 times, none of those times to my father. So I had, in the course of the book, 2 stepfathers. And this is, it kind of revolves around one of those stepfathers. One day, Mum came in from work with a dark expression on her face. I had been home from school a little while and lay as usual on the hearthrug, eating biscuits in front of Blue Peter. Mum looked as if she was going to come into the room, but she stopped at the doorway and just stood there, as if something was stopping her coming any closer. She looked weird, like a black cloud in a dress. She was looking at me, but didn't really see me. I expected her to turn the fire down to miser rate below his sitting, but she didn't. She just stood there. I already knew Mum wasn't happy. I knew this because every day before going to school and every day before going to bed, I found her on her knees, repainting the anaglypta wallpaper that covered the whole wall on all 3 floors of our house. She used a 2-inch brush and never had a mark of the white gloss paint on her blue overall. She painted and painted, but she wasn't really a person for DIY. That was my oldest brother Andrew's job. So this was odd. We 3 pretty much looked after ourselves while she was getting on with the painting. But sometimes I found her on the 1st floor outside the bathroom, or sometimes she'd be high in the eaves of the attic. This seemed a strange way to tackle the job. That is, if you must put more white on a wall which is already white, which only a grown-up would think of doing. Anyway, while she was painting the anaglypta and half-heartedly forcing using paint into the bubbled-up pattern, she had the same look as she's wearing now. Kate, get up and get your coat. We're going out. Ma'am, I whined. Usually she hated this, but this time she didn't really hear me. It was early for grown-up going out and late for me to go out. In any case, children's programmes were still on. Captain Pugwash hadn't even started yet. I wouldn't have minded if she'd waited until the news. Also, I'd been cold on the way home from school, and it was warm and comfy in front of the fire. We're going out. She turned and walked slowly, weirdly, out of the room. I knew something was really wrong. She hadn't even noticed the fire. I hauled myself up from the rug and turned it off. I knew better than to argue, so I put my duffel coat on and waited by the door. After a minute, Mum drifted down the hall towards me, wearing the pale blue, double-breasted raincoat that was big enough for her to wrap me inside when it was cold at the bus stop. She said nothing as she took my hand. We walked out the front door into the flinty winter air. Where are we going, Ma'am? To the pictures. And she was as good as a word. We went to see Digby, the biggest dog in the world, which I had already seen the week before. I didn't tell her this because Mum and I never go to the pictures together. Mum or Andrew sometimes took me to the lounge cinema at 9:30 on a Saturday morning. Quite often, one of them is there to pick me up at noon. The pictures is something I do on my own. Black and white children's film foundation serials, although we all have colour tellies, and there's a main film, and last week it was Digby. Also, we eat sweets, and some kids throw them all popcorn at each other, which is a waste. But this wasn't like that. Mum said it was a treat, and I got a tub of ice cream from the lady who carried a box of them in front of her. And there were lots of grown-ups there with their children, and the pictures was quiet and organised. I really liked Digby. I was enjoying it second time as well, which is unusual. But then I turned to look at Mum to see if she was laughing. She wasn't, and her face was pointing at the screen, but she wasn't watching it, I could tell. After the pictures, I thought we would go home. Paul would be back, and I still had my uniform on, which was itchy. But when we walked out into the street, Mum said, "Do you want to go for Wimpy? Do you want to go to the Wimpy for egg and chips?" Even though it was dark and most of the cars had gone home. I'd already had biscuits and milk and the ice cream and was a bit tired, but somehow I knew she wanted me to say yes, so that's what I did. At the Wimpy, I got egg and chips and a milkshake and tried to eat all of it because Mum was watching me over a cup of tea, and I wanted to make her happy by enjoying the food. And she did smile, but it wasn't a happy one. and there were still clouds in her eyes, even though it was night. The nice waitress who brought my food and Nan's tea started cleaning the tables near us. Everyone else had gone. She smiled at my mum, but Mum looked down. The waitress smiled at me, and I looked at her properly and grinned back, so she'd know we were okay and not mad or anything, and would be going soon. She came and stood next to our table. "Can I take these?" she said, pointing to the dirty crockery. Yes, we're just going, Mum said, but didn't try to put her coat on, even though we had nothing left to eat. I was feeling a bit sick because of all the food, and it was obvious the place was closing, and I was starting to feel a little bit embarrassed. "You got any more?" asked the nice waitress, gesturing at me with a saucer. "2 boys." Mum's voice was squeaky and breathy, and at the same time, as if she'd squeezed it out on a sigh. I could see her eyes were getting all watery, and I thought she might cry. But before I could think of how to get us out, before the tears came, the lady said, "You know, love, I've had 6, but I've never had a brown one." Then the waitress and Mum both started to laugh. I was so relieved I joined in too, even though I thought it was a silly thing to say, and the nice waitress had gone down a bit in my estimation. After this, we went home. After this, my stepdaddy Tom left, and he was gone for good this time, Mum said. Then after a while, her painting stopped as well, and it was safe again. Safe to run downstairs and trail my fingers against the cool folds of shiny white anaglipta without worrying that the gloss would come off in my hands. Is that a bit long? I hope that's okay.
Fantastic. I really want to say to everybody watching in, go out and buy it. I've got my copy here. It's Are We Home Yet? Good place yet. Katy, you get your copy of as well. You can buy it from all good retailers, Foyles, Waterstones, online, and support independent bookshops as well, because I know that lots of them have got it in stock too.
Yeah.
Katy, I am looking at the time. I have got loads more questions that I would love to ask you, but I'm very aware that we've probably got some questions from our audience, so I'm just going to have a quick look at the chat, hence the glasses on. Okay, while I'm searching for them, I wanted to sort of say that ultimately for me, I think it's a story of love and resilience. When you were writing the book, what did you hope that readers might take away from it?
Love, definitely. You can be so dysfunctional. I mean, really dysfunctional, and really affectionate. I would be really interested if anybody wants to ask me anything about writing it as well, because I can't emphasize enough how healing it is to put your truth out there in this way, and the course of writing it is about understanding what's happened to you as well. So
so there's an invitation there, people, if you'd like. If you'd like to ask Katy about writing, the writing of the memoir specific, please, this is your opportunity. While we're waiting for anybody to ask you about your writing specifically, Katy, the other thing I just really wanted, dead quick one, is about the sort of, as I say, I grew up working class northerner myself. There's lots and lots of humour in your book, as we heard in your readings. Do you have a view on, why the people from the north seem to find humour in tragedy? We've got a question actually that's just popped in from Sue, and I'd rather go over to her question than you answering mine. And it was one that I'm interested in as well. Did you have an idea about the structure of the book before you started, or was that something that evolved?
That's a great question, because I didn't have a structure, and I think it because I didn't have a structure, it was a very sort of higgledy-piggledy mess for a long time. And then I realised that my higgledy-piggledy mess sort of modelled the way I was constructing my life, if you like. It modelled my memories about what happened to us. So I tried to keep some of that in, going back and forth through time, and I mean, I've got to say, structuring is possibly the hardest thing about writing the process.
Brilliant.
Gosh, that sounded pretentious.
Got another really fantastic question from Daisy, who's asking, how much did you use writing as a form of therapy, and did you get any sort of negative reaction from truth telling?
Yeah, I have had negative reaction from truth telling. I think if you're, I think what I do, and I'm very clear about in the book, is that there's no self-help element to it. At the moment, kind of memoir crossed with self-help is a very, very popular form. I think I am incredibly clear that this is my truth, and I'm not speaking for anybody else or telling anybody else what to do. And I think that's protected me from quite a lot, actually. I think that was a decision made early on, like the slightly open ending, that it doesn't have a happy ending, it doesn't say everything was terrible and now everything's fantastic, or as I think of the influencer structure where you've been through something but you're better than before. So yes, I did get negativity, but I've limited that through the approach.
Great. I've got another question here, Katy, from Samantha. Good one too. Samantha would like to know, how do you check in with what's appropriate to share when it involves shame, and check in with your own boundaries?
Right. So, and Sharon's asked just underneath that, such a personal memoir. I wonder whether there's a conflict of what to put in and what to leave out. They're similar, and I think that's about judgment. I've changed some names in it for legal reasons. I always say to protect the guilty, and there's some truth in that. But I've changed some names in it, and yeah, there were some things I wanted to include, and there were some things that weren't very, very personal to me, but they were incredibly personal to other people. And I felt that I couldn't sort of use hearsay, things that I'd only been told about other people and couldn't prove or couldn't. So I've just stuck to my own truth, and your boundaries are the things that your judgment gives you. I think it's about how much you can bear. Nobody is forcing you to share everything. So, and it can feel like a kind of a nudity Olympics with who can be the most traumatized in memoir. But it's not really about that. It's about, what do you want to say? What is the book about, essentially? And mine was about how a young girl forms a personality through quite difficult events. And hopefully it's done okay. I like to think I'm all right. You know, so.
And Samantha saying that makes sense. Which it does. I mean, identity. Identity is a key, you know, it's a key theme, isn't it, in the book? And I wondered, it's possibly going to be the next question and the last question, unless somebody else says something, is that, you know, identity in a world that isn't always welcoming is a key theme. And I just, what does British mean to you? That's a pretty big question to finish on, isn't it?
Well, me and you and everybody. I think the struggle to define these things is part of the problem, actually. I think the struggle to be the authority that pins these things down is part of the problem. Britishness is a made-up thing. States, countries, nationalities, they're all made-up things. And I did politics for my first degree. So it was a relief to find that out, actually. But, you know, we haven't been organised into nation states. Italy's only been one country for less than a couple of hundred years. You know, it's good to be reminded that nothing's accidental. And when something is presented to you as normal and natural, look at whose interests that's in, who is gaining from that belief, because pretty much everything has been constructed in one way or another. It makes absolute sense for me I have a chapter where I talk about Britishness, and I think that's absolutely fine to have an opinion about these things, but I am in no way saying that mine is the only version. But I just think I do love my country, actually, and I wanted to write about it because I can't imagine, even though my father was Jamaican and my mum was French Canadian, I can't imagine I would have been me anywhere else. If you see what I mean. I can't imagine having found that space. Yeah, I found that you find the odd interstitial spaces in this country that are not really well defined. They're not really looked after. They're not really guarded. And most people can find some space to express themselves, and that keeps us forward looking and vibrant and viable.
Katy, I think we are sadly almost out of time. So I just want to once again say to people, please go out and buy Are We Home Yet? It's a really, really fantastic read. Yeah.
Thank you, Emma.
Thank you.
Emma is just so that author's one. Thank you so much. I wanted to thank everybody as well. It's one of the things I've missed during this period, as a debut writer especially, is meeting people in person that have read the book. Because don't you go for years, Laura, on a book without anybody reading it? Yeah. And Zoom has enabled me to do all this from my back bedroom, and still to put my daughter to bed. So I'm really, really grateful that you've turned up. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure talking to you.
I can see all these wonderful comments. I don't want to go.
I know. I'm just going to have to put my glasses on to hear what people are saying about your book. Yes, it is a wonderful read, says Jenny. Valerie is saying thank you. She loved the readings. Great topics. Kate is also saying thank you for wonderful readings. Good questions. Terrific book.
Thank you, Kate. Valerie.
Rupert says that you are so inspirational. I'll second that one. Joe says, oh, this is right up my street. I'm going to buy this book for sure.
Definitely North London, right up my street. Yeah, definitely.
Right up my alley. That's what I say if it doesn't sound too rude.
Oh, it's the Ginnell. It's a Ginnell in Leeds. The back passage, the Ginnell. Right. I think on that note, thank you, Joe, and thank you for such a kind of you. I'm going to say ta-ta, and thank you, Laura.
Yeah, it's been pleasure, absolute pleasure. Sort of run out of time, really.
I know. You could be here all night.
I know. I think you need to go and have a glass of Prosecco.
I think so. I'm boiling.
Definitely do that in real life when we can.
Definitely. We are missing some celebrations, aren't we?
Yeah,
thanks so much to Joe and Sharon as well.
I think there might be some more comments.
Rosemary
says it's a wonderful book.
Oh yes, the Ginnell. Oh yes, the Ginnell. Half of my teenage years happened in a Ginnell. All the snicket. I'm not having
all the snicket. Lovely coffees.
Oh dear. Are we? I think we're ready to go up.
I say, are we going? I don't know. It's like that end of the party. Who's going to be last? Who's going to be last to leave?
Yeah. Then we're going to have to pour into a taxi. There we are. Oh, right.
I'm going to have to end the meeting now because we're going to have to.
Thank you, Samantha. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks.